This is Secular Founding Period History, and my name is Tony Messina. This is a response to Citizens United Decision by SCOTUS by Tony Messina. Introduction. Hi, my name is Tony Messina, and this is my work in an attempt to address the situation regarding the unconstitutional Citizens United Decision by SCOTUS. The original social framework that was established by our founders, our democratic republic, is fragile and perpetually under a liberal state of constant alteration and construction, in a search for a more perfect union as the Constitution was designed to do, which is not a bad thing. But when certain individuals find it necessary to force changes according to their private interests, and they don't want to employ legal methods to satisfy or redress to their grievances, so they attempt to find other questionable avenues to advance their interests by stretching the constitutional limits under which we are bound, is a bad thing. PACs try to do something in a questionably side-door way, while they should just be convincing a majority of the people of the good of their interest and then having their way at the voting booth, where it appears that they can't win. So they try to win by cheating. Unconstitutional tampering is a crime of treason. Okay, these are a couple of shots from the contest propaganda video that we received to do this presentation. I'm just going to say there's some characters and things in here that are quite questionable. You seem to have like this brick wall between a guy with a bag of money and some guy at a desk. The next picture of the brick wall is missing the bricks. I don't know what's going on there. You got a bunch of arrows going everywhere. I know you're explaining this, but just basically speaking, the visual of it is just out of founding period nowhere. I don't recognize anything in here. What you have here does not fit in my mind to things put forward by the Founding Fathers at all. It's nothing short of attempted bribery on top of attempted bribery with some kind of wall there. There is so much out of order with these two illustrations. My first question would be to ask, where's the people? We see no people here. See part 2 of my presentation, where I will show you the proper use of a brick wall erected by the people, including the people. And just quickly here to poke some fun at this presentation I'm putting on, I'm going to show what this illustration actually should look like. It should be that the Pac-Man gave the money to the space alien, then the space alien flew it around the moon to clean the dirty money. Somehow doing that cleans the money. So now it's no longer dirty money, and it's okay to give to the Pac. I'm just going to explain this real quick. Take note of the beauty you see here, as this is the government the founders gave us. This is our federal government. It's got our 3 departments, the executive, the judiciary, and Congress with the 2 houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. It says here, state legislatures elected all senators, therefore senators are beholding to the state governments. And likewise, the citizens of the states elected all members of the House of Representatives, therefore representatives are beholding to their citizens of the states, their constituents. So that's the way the beauty of what we had when it began. Now let's take a look at what has happened. Yes, what you're looking at here is a major train wreck. It's like a blow-up doll at a Republican convention. It has more holes poked in it than is reasonably feasible. We have literally obliterated our government and constitution. We have allowed illegal, unconstitutional corporation and PACs or the rich lobbying in the executive. Illegal, unconstitutional corporations and PACs of the rich to buy influence for the special interests in the judiciary. We know all about that now very clearly as to what's going on. Then in Congress, we're supposed to have At least the citizens elect the senators and the House of Representatives now, as opposed to before it was differently set up. But either way, the PAC, CPAC, and Super PACs want to poke holes and knock us out. It makes it not even worth it for us to vote, is what has actually resulted. No, this is not good. This is a train wreck, and now I'm going to show you things about the founding period in the historical record that you've never seen before. Part 1. Federal Debates on the Bill of Rights on the Instructing of Representatives, from the book Creating the Bill of Rights. Part 2. State constitutional language regarding instructing representatives and the limits of any corporation or association of men. Part 3. Illustrated review of social arrangement with corporations and the proper wall placement regarding the wall of 51%. Part 4. Illustrations visually depicting the framework of a proper social arrangement for a democracy and living by your own laws. And visually speaking, what exactly is a democracy and or a democratic republic? Sources: all state constitutions written between 1776 and 1787, and the book Creating the Bill of Rights by Part 1. Debates on the Bill of Rights on the Instructing of Representatives, from the book Creating the Bill of Rights. Okay, what we're looking at here is the first of 11 pages that I have notated regarding the Instructing of Representatives. What we have is 11 pages. We're not going to read all of them. We're going to read my highlighted points on the pages, and we're going to work our way through these. The Instructing of Representatives. Directly instructing representatives would actually defy and circumvent the very nature of our republican form of government that was established for the job of representing a large number of people over a large area. Directly instructing representatives is tantamount to a direct democracy framework, not a democratic republican framework. The fact is that the clause for instructing representatives that was introduced in the debates was rejected after an extensive 11-page debate and careful consideration given to it finally ended. What follows is an examination of the subject of adopting an amendment for instructing representatives as debated by the founders. First thing you see here is we have Mr. Tucker move to introduce the words to instruct their representatives. Here we find that Mr. Hartley tells us this: the practice of instructing representatives may be attended with danger, and I circled danger all through these pages, so we see it said so many times. We have seen it attended with bad consequences. It is commonly resorted to for party purposes and when the passions are up. Okay? The right of instructing is liable to great abuses. It will generally be exercised in times of popular commotion, and these instructions will rather express the prejudices of party than the dictates of reason and policy. Okay? Then we have Mr. Clymer just below, makes his comment. We must go further and say that the representatives are bound by the instructions, which is a most dangerous principle and is destructive of all ideas of an independent and deliberative body. This will be an argued point throughout the course of the debates. Unfortunately, they can't seem to come to an understanding of whether or not instructing representatives bounds the representative to the instructions. And here we find Mr. Sherman telling us that these words had a tendency to mislead the people by conveying an idea that they had a right to control the debates of the federal legislature. Instructions cannot be considered as a proper rule for a representative to form his conduct by. They cannot be adequate to the purposes for which he is delegated. He is to consult the good of the whole. Instead of instruct, you would consult. And that's the great word that needed to be introduced here. Should instructions therefore coincide with his ideas of the common good, they would be unnecessary. If they were contrary, he would be bound by every principle of justice to disregard them. Okay, at the top of the page here, we see that Mr. Jackson opposed the motion. He said this was a dangerous article, as its natural tendency is to divide the House into factions. He then adverted to the absurdities and inconsistencies which would be involved in adopting the measure. Facilitating this as a right would be a nightmare. That's all there is to it. He's making that point. The next thing down, we see written here, Mr. Madison makes the point that representatives are to be bound by these instructions. The principle is false. He's making the point here that it is not true that if you are instructed that you're bound by those instructions, which is to say that none of the representatives would ever be bound by any of the instructions from PACs or CPACs or super PACs. Our representatives are not beholding to them. Okay, the very top line, this would be setting up an 100 sovereignties in the place of one. Actually, that's kind of true. Each citizen would become a sovereignty. Ironically, that's what we are. We're sovereign little units that meet up, gather together, and we create a greater society of the whole when we found our state. Okay, Mr. Smith and Mr. Stone follows with some interesting information here that should be read. Then we find our way down to Mr. Livermore making his comments. I never knew merely political instructions to be observed, and I never knew a representative brought to an account for it. But I have known representatives follow instructions contrary to their private sentiments, and they have never been despised for it. Others have disregarded their instructions and have been reelected and caressed. So what he's saying here is that being bound by instructions is an interesting thing to think about, but it's not something that you're going to have to do as a representative, be bound by anybody's instructions. That's the ultimate final say. The debate was continued much longer, but in a desultory way, as the speakers appeared to take it for granted that they might touch upon collateral circumstances. And here Mr. Hartley speaks again, making the point that to be elected to office, the candidate has to already know the interests of his constituents. If the Senate and House have its interests, no need to include other sources like a PAC. Party interests ruin everything, offers suspiciously insightful history on the subject here. Representation is the principle of our government. The people ought to have confidence in the honor and integrity of those they send forward to transact their business. Their right to instruct them is a problematical subject. We have seen it attended with bad consequences, both in England and America. When the passions of the people were excited, instructions have been resorted to and obtained to answer party purposes. Okay, the point being made here is, what is being said here is, does a PAC, a select body, versus a part, know what's better for the whole, or does the whole know what's better for the PAC or the part? That's the absolute question at hand in this whole debate, this whole presentation. What shall we say of instructions to this body? Can it be supposed that the inhabitants of a single district in a state are better informed with respect to the general interests of the Union than a select body assembled from every part? Can it be supposed that a part will be more desirous of promoting the good of the whole than the whole will of the part? Okay. Elected office is not an agency that requires written instructions. It appears to my mind that the principle of representation is distinct from an agency which may require written instructions. And then we have this to read. Sir, I have known within my own time so many inconveniencies and real evils arise from adopting the popular opinions of the moment, that although I respect them as much as any man, I hope this government will particularly guard against them, at least that they will not bind themselves to a constitutional act by and by oath to submit to their influence. If they do, the great object of which this government has been established to attain will inevitably elude our grasp on the uncertain and veering winds of popular commotion. Okay, nothing mentioned here about a Bible to form a code of laws congenial with public sentiment. But under a democracy whose great end is to form a code of laws congenial with the public sentiment, the popular opinion ought to be collected and attended to. And again at the bottom, we see a cautionary, it's a dangerous thing, a dangerous doctrine being talked about here regarding instructing representatives. And here again we see that it's referred to as a dangerous principle. Gentlemen foresee the extent of these words. If they have a constitutional right to instruct us, it infers that we are bound by those instructions. Then at the bottom we see Mr. Jackson again talking, and he points out that it's a dangerous doctrine. He begged gentlemen to consider the dangerous tendency of establishing such a doctrine. Okay, some pages I'm posting here are for you to stop the presentation and just read them on your own. This one is filled with philosophical discussion on the topic of instructing representatives. And in the back you'll see in my depictions of a democratic republic, I talk about these things with pictorial ability to see what's going on when you talk about a democratic republic or a democracy. Here we say, Republican government is a representative government, and defined very well here by these gentlemen. But what is the necessity of having a numerous representation? One member from a state can receive the instructions and by his vote answer all the purposes of many. And a Mr. Stone tells us some very interesting things here. I think the clause would change the government entirely. Instead of being a government founded upon representation, it would be a democracy of singular properties. And I show you at the end of this presentation the difference between a direct democracy and a democratic republic. He's talking about the mixing of two in this sentence. He seems not to clearly understand the difference between the two. And then he points out that he differs from Madison's view in that he thinks the clause would bind the representatives to the instructions of his constituents. And here is yet another discussion by Mr. Gary. He offers us some philosophical discussion here. Mr. Gary was a major player in the creation of this country. He was involved in the creation and adoption of the Federal Constitution and now the Bill of Rights. And this page is basically a continuation of philosophical discussion taking place. You can stop these pages at any time and read the whole page if you like. Okay, the next page, the philosophical discussions continue, and we have an interesting comment from Mr. Livermore here. He was from New Hampshire. He was not very anxious whether the words were inserted or not, but he had a great deal of doubt about the meaning of this whole amendment. Okay, and we have this rather smart-aleck comment from Mr. Gary where he says there was one remark which escaped him when he was up before. The gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Stone, had said that the amendment would change the nature of the government and make it a democracy. Now, he had always heard that it was a democracy, but perhaps he was misled, and the honorable gentleman was right in distinguishing it by some other appellation. Perhaps an aristocracy was a term better adopted to it. Very interesting. Then Mr. Sedgwick makes a comment here that I don't recall reading earlier. He makes the comment that the gentleman from New Hampshire, who happens to be Mr. Livermore, the arrow points down to him following this comment. He said that the state legislature had the power of instructing the members of this house, and he looked upon it as a subordination of the rights of the people to submit to such authority. Interestingly confusing things being said here, but of it all, we have very important words here explaining things clearly. I consider myself a representative of the whole Union. An individual may give me information, but his sentiments may be in opposition to the sense of the majority of the people. If instructions are to be of any efficacy, they must speak to the sense of the majority of the people, at least of a state. And then Mr. Ames says the same thing that Mr. Jackson said. He said that there would be a very great inconvenience attending the establishment of the doctrine. And here Mr. Ames goes on to say, according to the doctrine of the gentleman from New Hampshire, one part of the government would be annihilated, for of what avail is it that the people have the appointment of a representative if he is to pay obedience to the dictates of another body? This totally would not work. What good does it do to have an elected rep when another body can upstage you? Then Mr. Page offers us these words: every freeman would have a right to come and give his vote upon the law, but inasmuch as this cannot be done by reason of the extent of the territory, that's why you need a Republican form of government to have a representative go to government and work for you, which is what makes representative governments work over distance. How to be collected? Yes. Several states had instructing their reps in constitutions. How does that work? Okay, one gentleman asks how the instructions are to be collected. Many parts of this country have been in the practice of instructing their representatives. They found no difficulty in communicating their sense. Then we have from Mr. Wadsworth at the bottom, state constitutions had instruction of representatives. Instructions have frequently been given to the representatives throughout the United States. This is in the states, though. And there are some very insightful words here on this following page to consider. One point I want to make here is that citizens were citizens of the states, not the federal government. So when you're thinking how things are going to work, you've got to always keep that in mind, that the people were not citizens of the federal government. That didn't happen until after the Civil War. The people were citizens of their state governments. Okay? So the discussion is going to be focused with that perspective in mind all through these pages. And then on the next page here we have Mr. Burke telling us that I am not positive with respect to the particular expression in the Declaration of Rights of the People of Maryland, but the constitutions of Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina, all of them recognize in express terms the right of the people to give instructions to their representatives. Each state decided this question on their own, and this issue applies to the people. And the people are citizens of the state government, not the federal government. Okay? So then we have from Mr. Sinnickson here, debates had broken down and lost interest. Inquired of Mr. Chairman, what was the question before the committee? For really, debate had become so desultory as to induce him to think it was lost sight of altogether. Okay, and then we have Mr. Lawrence here giving us his final words against the amendment proposed by the gentleman from South Carolina. And finally here Mr. Tucker makes the comment, because every member on this floor ought to consider himself the representative of the whole Union and not of the particular district which had chosen him, as their decisions were to bind every individual of the Confederated States. It was wrong to be guided by the voice of a single district. In a Republican form of government, it's the elected official's job to know what's best for the whole without undue influence from the part. The question comes down to, do we want the tail to wag the dog, or do we want the dog to wag its tail? It's the job of the elected official to wag its own tail and make all the determinations independent of differing influences and interests, be they a single person or a group of persons. Sub-societies should have no say over the society of the whole, and elected officials are sworn in to both maintain that and make sure of that. Summation. The general consensus regarding the debates is about 50-50 on keeping the language. It was a mix of individuals that could not agree on whether or not the instructions from the people to their elected officials was binding or not. Ultimately, Madison, like others, did not care if the language was in or out. Either way, he said it was not binding to the elected official. This petty disagreement regarding such an issue as this shows the disconnect underlying the debates in general. Either way, if you were to ask any of the delegates what they would think about giving a corporation any form of connection to the elected official at this moment when they had just decided that an individual cannot, I would venture to say that they would agree that it matters not, neither any individual nor a group of individuals were ever to be granted any special powers or rights apart from the rest. If instructing an elected official is not even going to happen, then why would the bribery of a PAC be acceptable? It's not. It's a crime. Okay, now we're going to look at this in another way here. We have the duly elected official by a majority of the citizens. Keep in mind that in the debates there was no distinguishing between an individual or a group when it comes to the act of instructing representatives, as we cover both here anyway in the following illustration. Okay, now here we see the individual voting citizen on the left and the elected official on the right. The result of the debates is that the clause for instructing representatives was rejected. And the illustration here shows that his input to the elected official through instructing his representatives has been severed by this lightning bolt. If a single citizen can't instruct our representatives directly, then why would a group of citizens in the form of a PAC get to instruct our representatives? That's impossible, or it should be. The group is going to have contact with the representative, but the individual citizen is not. Okay, so I beg to differ. So this is really the way it should be. Either individual or group, they shouldn't instruct the representatives, and that would include a PAC. Tapping the elected official's ear for any reason whatsoever was made absolutely unconstitutional. Whatsoever includes any individual at all or any collection of individuals grouped together for any reasons whatsoever in an act of quid pro quo or otherwise. It matters not. Part 2. State constitutional language regarding instructing representatives, a redress of grievances, and the limits of any corporation or association of men. State language is extremely important to analyze, as the people were all citizens of the states respectively. Too often people ignore state constitutional language, being ignorant to its true value. This is where you were a citizen in the founding period. In a state, you were a citizen of that state. Each state naturalized their own citizens according to the laws designed by each state individually. This was an issue the newly formed federal government tried to tackle with an uniform code of naturalization. This would not take place, though, until after the Civil War. Here you will find that the people as a whole, a majority of 51%, are the rulers of their states, and it is them by a majority, the minority notwithstanding, that are exclusively in control. Summation of state constitutional language. 1. Constitution of Virginia, 1776. Section 4. That no man or set of men are entitled to exclusive or separate emoluments or privileges from the community. Here, in the first complete constitution adopted in 1776, Virginia gives us the beginning clause of what will be improved by other states as they follow. A set of men would imply a group of citizens, such as a corporation, as we will see in the following illustrations. Number 2, the Constitution of Pennsylvania, 1776, Article 5. that government is or ought to be instituted for the common benefit, protection, and security of the people, nation, or community, and not for the particular emolument or advantages of any single man, family, or set of men who are part only of that community. Article 16. That the people have a right to assemble together to consult for their common good, to instruct their representatives, and to apply to the legislature for a redress of grievances by petition or address, petition, or remonstrance. Take note that the language single man, family, or set of men who are a part only of that community. Here we see a broadening of the things prohibited to include a family, as a family is also a group of citizens, to imply that anything group-oriented is a target. And number 3, Constitution of Massachusetts, 1780. Article 6. No man, nor corporation, or association of men, have any other title to obtain advantages or particular and exclusive privileges distinct from those of the community. And then following we have mention of instructions to their representatives by way of addresses, petitions, or remonstrances, redress of the wrongs, and then makes mention of redress of grievances. And finally, number 4, in the Constitution of New Hampshire, 1784, Article 10, government being instituted for the common benefit, protection, and security of the whole community, and not for the private interests or emolument of any one man, family, or class of men. Then further down we have the legislature ought frequently to assemble for the redress of grievances. And then following that we see that the people have a right in an orderly and peaceable manner to assemble and consult upon the common good, give instructions to their representatives, and to request of the legislative body by way of petition and remonstrance redress of the wrongs done them. Answer me this question. Can a CPAC appeal for redress of wrongs done them? So now let us take a concise look at the summary of the list of those who are constitutionally not to be allowed to be treated any different than any other citizen. 1. No man or set of men. 2. Single man, family, or set of men who are part only of that community. 3. No man, nor corporation, or association of men. 4. One man, family, or class of men. And then this reduces to no man, individual man, no set of men, group of men, no single man, individual man, no families, all of their members, no to those who are part only of the community, no to corporations, no to associations of men, no to a class of men. Therefore I say no to any PAC, CPAC, or Super PAC at all. This list alone proves that anything a PAC is trying to do is unconstitutional. Summation on the unconstitutional crime of lobbying. Lobbying, by definition. Lobbying means communicating with any official in the legislative or executive branch for the purpose of attempting to influence legislative or administrative action or a ballot issue. According to the information in the last 28 pages, I would say that nobody should be allowed to engage in any kind of instruction or coercion with the government officials in any way, shape, or form. But to do that, money has to be dealt with. Lobbying and PACs are unconstitutional no matter how you size it up. Part 3. Illustrated review of social arrangement with corporations and the proper placement regarding the wall of 51%, and rights and powers are individually based, not group based, and they are inherent within each and every person individually on the back of a 51% majority. This does not translate to a group of citizens gathered together for any reason or cause, claiming their numbers give them any greater standing or credence in this society of the whole, as their collecting in a minority group does not grant them any rights any greater than our right of freedom to assemble and speak. These rights that we all already have, as you're always free to speak and appeal to the majority for change. Okay, on the first page here, rights and powers. The people have all inherent rights and powers. All rights and powers are inherent in the individual, each to themselves individually. There is only a society of the whole. From here you can voluntarily belong to any group or subsociety if you choose to, but you will always be a citizen of the whole society. Next, as the illustration shows, the people grant a constitution of limited powers to a government of their own making. As a closed system, there is no call for, therefore no avenue for, any outside input to it at all. It does come equipped with an amendment clause, though. So, theoretically, nothing can or should come between the people as a whole and their government. Nothing, including any kind of group or faction by any title or individual name whatsoever. What then maintains our state of self-determination? The wall of 51% is what maintains our independence and our current state of self-determination. That's what. With it, we establish a protection from all enemies, both foreign and domestic. All enemies, both foreign and domestic, will attempt to destroy the domestic tranquility enjoyed by a majority of the people. Foreign enemies are one thing, domestic enemies are yet another. Let us look at some possible domestic enemies to our tranquility. And we will look at the corporations of the founding period. Can anyone out there think of what the dominant corporations were in the founding period? In the founding period, the dominant corporations were religious institutions. We had some municipalities, towns, cities, or counties that would incorporate, but basically speaking, there were no cluster of businesses incorporating and creating a society in the founding period like we have today. In the founding period, the major number of corporations were religious or ecclesiastical. When it comes to ecclesiastical corporations, the founders were concerned about factions. And to control the influence of church corporations on the civil government, certain rules were made. One, for example, was ministers being prohibited from public office. Clearly an act of corporate control by the state. Rule number 1. If the church corporation wants to access control of our government, they must, like anyone else, bear the burden of rule number 1, the wall of 51%. And next we have corporations of today. The predominant corporations of today are in the hundreds, if not thousands. To control the influence of any and all corporations on the civil government, certain rules need to be made, including rules that make very clear our wall of 51% rule. And again, for corporations of today, rule number 1, if any and all corporations want to access control of our government, they are free, and like anyone else, they can bear the burden of rule number 1, the wall of 51%. They have to qualify their interests and or objective first with the people at the polls. Theoretically, nothing can or should come between the people and their government, unless 51% approve of it. Nothing includes any kind of group or faction by any title or name whatsoever Nada. Rights and powers ecclesiastical. It matters not if it's ecclesiastical or otherwise. It's still a corporation. Separation of church and state is a valuable and critical component of a society based on fairness and equality. To deny the CEO, minister, faction leader of a government job of representation is protection for the people as a whole from those enemies of a domestic nature, as they are known true sources of faction and social division, and many founders knew this. The Constitution of New York, 1777. And whereas the ministers of the gospel are by their profession dedicated to the service of God and the care of souls, and ought not to be diverted from their great duties of their function, therefore no minister of the gospel or priest of any denomination whatsoever shall at any time hereafter, under any pretense or description whatever, be eligible to or capable of holding any civil or military office or place within this state. So for the leaders of the most respected occupation in the land to be outright prohibited from running for office, to be acceptable for any reason you might apply, then why would government control of anything of a lesser value be objected to, such as a pack? Why do those of a pack think they are greater than a minister? Rights and powers and the individual citizen. Hugh Williamson's speech, November 1787. This letter is 6 pages, of which this extracted passage below was taken from. Their rights in the several states have long since been explained and secured by particular declarations which make up a part of their several state constitutions. It is granted and perfectly understood that under the government of the assemblies of the states and under the government of the Congress, every right is reserved to the individual, which he has not expressly delegated to this or that legislature. No mention of any kind of group or corporation, ecclesiastical or otherwise, or to any group of people such as a family or citizens of any sort of subsociety at all. Understanding rights and powers. All rights and powers are inherently indivisible from the individual, and are an exclusive possession of all of the individuals in a given state. Individually, not by group or faction, but individually, rights and powers are possessed. Neither rights nor powers can ever be granted by any government, as rights and powers are inherent to the individual. They are never possessed in any greater form by any group or subsociety. The world exists between the individuals of a given state and their duly elected officials. Unless the people either grant powers or give up certain rights for the good of the whole, the rights and powers are retained by and belong to the individuals of a state, but not to a group or a faction. Rather, rights and powers are reduced to the individual. Part 4. Illustrations visually depicting the framework for the proper social arrangement of a democracy and living by your own laws. And visually speaking, what exactly is a democracy and or a democratic republic? The people of the founding period were all citizens of the states. The people of America were not citizens of the federal government until post-Civil War. Therefore, discussion always needs to be understood in this way. The people were citizens of their states. This erects a social framework in an interestingly unique way. The identity of the delegates of the convention were state-based. Their names carried with them the stereotypes of their respective states. Some groups want to reduce the free exercise of other rights, while some groups want to increase the free exercise of other rights. Jefferson and Madison both teach us how we can live by our own laws. That's the greatest part of being an American. In the following illustrations, I will show you the framework of both a democracy and a social arrangement wherein people can actually, to a great extent, freely, basically, and legally live by their own laws. Okay, Jefferson teaches us that laws are to be made by those who are to obey them. Here we see a state being made up of 15 people, or perhaps 15 million people. All the same, no different in the eyes of the state, all equal in rights and powers. All right, we're going to call this group of people, it's a group of voting citizens. Now we're going to give all of these citizens a seat at the table, none different from one than the other, all equal at the table with each other. This depiction just shows that we don't want anyone to be out of line here. We don't want to deny or discourage anyone from having or taking their seat at the table. On the other hand, we don't want to just give anyone special rights, privileges, or immunities unless they might be qualified. So we don't want anyone sitting on the table. And in this illustration depicts a direct democracy where every citizen in person sits at the table and has an equal right to vote and to conduct government business directly without any representatives. These are the people sitting at the table. They're directly conducting their government's business. This is a direct democracy. Okay, what I'm showing here is we have two sub-societies that have come about in our state. Using the letter V, we've converted 6 of these citizens, 3 in one group and 3 in another, of like interests. They are all volunteer societies. They have a common interest, so they meet together and they create what's called a sub-society. They are sub-societies of the whole. Okay? It's very simple, very simplistic. While you are a naturalized citizen of the state, a member of the society of the whole, you are only a volunteer member of any and all sub-societies. You are not a volunteer member of the state. You are a citizen. The types of sub-societies that there can be are as numerous as there are people. Any group or association of like-minded people constitute a sub-society and can partake in the free exercise of their inherent rights of both speech and assembly. You can see here in the illustration that we have 2 sub-societies set up of people that were of like-minded interests. They got together, and this is what results. In an effort to show you how laws are to be made by those who are to obey them, and that people can live by their own laws, we're going to now talk about a couple of institutions within our society. The Anglican Church of volunteer members, people of society that want to join the church, they're free to do that. So we have an Anglican church here with 3 members, and we happen to have a Baptist church here that has 3 members of our 15-member society in it. Each one of them are free to make any laws they choose to be stricter than the laws that the society has. You can deny your rights voluntarily by denying things to yourself that your church prohibits, let's say. So we're going to talk about it from this perspective. And we're going to use a very simple thing. We're going to use contraceptives are legal. In this state, contraceptives happen to be legal. The people of this state have the free exercise of their inherent right to have and use contraceptives. They're legal because the majority of the citizens had decided that that's the way it shall be. Okay? Well, we have a Baptist church in our society, and the Baptists prohibit the use of contraceptives. Well, is the dog going to wag its tail, or is the tail going to wag the dog? Here we understand that in this free society, where all of the people are free to buy and use contraceptives, even if they belong to the Baptist church that wants to prohibit them, everyone's free to use and partake in contraceptives, but the Baptist church has the authority within their own polity, within their own little government, their little world, to prohibit their own adherents from buying or using contraceptives. The Baptist church has every right to tell its citizens what they can and can't do, because that's what they're allowed to do. The Baptist church is not allowed to get hold of our government and make our government make a law that makes it that nobody can use contraceptives. No, that's backwards. That's the way the church has worked in the past, and it's not good. Prohibition-minded organizations like churches have done more to destroy America than anything else. But here we have the Baptist church in a free society where contraceptives are illegal to use, and they are themselves going to deny that to themselves voluntarily. And consequently, now you're free to live by your own laws, and the rest of us are free to live by the laws we choose to live by also. In this scenario, we are all free. It should be easy to follow along now and understand this advanced illustration depicts the framework of a proper social arrangement in a democracy. As you can see, everyone can live by their own laws with the proper social arrangement. Okay, what we have here in the big triangle is the general body of voting citizens, which without preference equally includes, and I use these references from the writings of Jefferson and Madison to compose this language, people of religion 1, 2, and 3, and as Madison tells us, people whom are Jews, Turks, and infidels, and as Jefferson tells us, infidels of every denomination. Okay, these citizens, all the circles, all those little circles are people, this society of citizens have left these rights untouched. The right of citizens 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, we don't need to itemize them by name. You just understand that rights are for everybody, and if you want to deny yourself any rights, that's exactly what you can do. For example, a certain number of citizens to the left have created religion number 1, and in their church they prohibit 5. Prostitution. Okay, the church government exerts power over people of religion number 1 only. So it's easy to see the church government of religion number 1 has decided that prostitution shall be illegal. The other citizens of the state make up their minds independently of this religion number 1 group, because nobody has to take any orders from them. They can voluntarily obey their own laws and live their own lives and still live in a inclusive society with the rest of us, of our differing opinions and our prohibitions, self-imposed prohibitions, along with our joining of voluntary societies. We're free to do that. From Jefferson and Madison's writings, we can understand there are laws of man to God and laws of man to man. The laws of man to man are the civil laws that we all live by according to our civil government and our civil law code, and that's the laws that we live by, all the citizens equally. Then you have laws of man to God, and there's people in society that gather together and create a religion, and they live by a set of laws according to that religion, and they're free to voluntarily live by the laws of their God, and they still live in society with the rest of us living by the laws of man to man. It's easy to see in this depiction everything that needs to be implied when it comes to living in a free democracy. What exactly is a democracy, and what is a democratic republic, and what is the difference between them? What is their relationship? You're looking at a depiction of a direct democracy, as I had showed earlier, and so if this is a direct democracy wherein all 15 citizens of this state directly show up and conduct business monthly, then what is a democratic republic? It's a representative democracy, and it works like this. Simply put, 15 representatives for 15 districts. Each district has hundreds of constituents. Representatives do the work of their constituents. Here we see in the picture the 15 individuals at the table, the seat of government, are representatives, and they represent 15 different districts, each district having differing numbers of citizens. Now we have 15 elected representatives sitting at the table doing the business of the people they represent from the 15 districts that they were sent from. These 15 districts contain a total of 658,000 constituents, far too many people to sit at the table all at the same time every month. So to make things more expedient, the people of a district annually vote for a representative to go to the seat of government and do their business. What I just described is a democratic republic. The people, democratic, vote for representatives, form of government republic, to work for them in the government seat. Behold, framework of a democratic republic. This is Secular Founding Period History, and my name is Tony Messina.